Now we have to create the data structure for the sign up. So for that purpose, in our project backend Amazon clone, we are going to create a new folder by the name data underscore structure underscore models. Now inside the data structure models folder, we are going to create a new file, and this file name will be user underscore schema underscore model. So user schema model, and make sure to write the extension alongside with it as well, user underscore schema underscore model dot js. First we will require here the mongoose. We will add that. We can access it by the name mongoose MongoDB. Now as I told you, this user schema model is basically a schema model, or you can say the format using which the data will be saved inside the MongoDB with the key value pair, just like you guys see in other NoSQL database like Firestore, for example. So we can say const user schema equals to mongoose MongoDB dot schema parenthesis, then add curly braces, make sure to add semicolon at the end, and then in here we will define the user schema. So for example, about the user, the first information that we have is, for example, the username. Okay, add curly braces, comma, and then inside here we can add the information like the type for the username will be string, and it is required, that is the user must provide the username, and then trim true. Trim simply means sometimes when the user typed the username, the user sometimes left some extra spaces. So this trim basically remove the extra spaces from the text, or you can say from the string. So username, comma, then user email, and make sure to use the same names so that later you do not get confused. After it we have the user password, and then after the password we have the user address, and this is not required. Okay, that's why we give it a default value empty string, and the type of this is string. Then after this, the important thing is the user type. So user type, which is type string, and default we can give it user. Now this user type simply means, for example, we have three kind of users in this project. One is the end user, the common user who will use the app and purchase things. The second type of the user is the seller, or you can say the vendors, and the third type of user are the admins. So yeah, this is all about our user schema. And once again, please use the same names so that later you do not get confused. Now to create the collection inside the MongoDB, we can say mongoose MongoDB dot model, and inside the MongoDB a collection will be created by the name users, and to which we will pass our schema, user schema. So inside the MongoDB, users collection created with this schema, and we assign that to our user model. Now to access this user model in our project, we will export it. So we can say module.exports, and exports the user model. So this is how we create a schema, or you can say a data structure or a model, and then we create a collection. For example, under the collection users, we will have our user schema, which will contain, for example, the username, user email, password, address, and type. For the email, one thing we have to do is to add the validation. We will only allow the formatted email addresses. The user cannot save wrong formats in the email. So for that purpose, we can simply say validator colon and then val value const email res, means email result, I will provide you this text file, and it contains these characters, special characters for email validation. So you have to just download this file and then copy from here these characters and simply come back here and simply paste it here, just like this. It is const. Okay, and then we can say it will return the result dot test and test the value. So if the user use any special character while writing the email address, then in that case we will display the message, and that message will be to the user, that is please write correct email address. So make sure to add this validation, then click file and click save all. So now let's create the API endpoint for the authentication, which means the sign up and sign in. So for that purpose we have already created this auth.js file. Now here we have to include our user model. So you can say const user model equals to require, and okay, so inside the double quotes we can say inside our project backend Amazon clone API, that is which is by the name backend Amazon clone. Inside it we have a folder by the name data structure models, and in here we have this file by the name user schema model, which you know that here we have the user model, so we have to access it. Okay, so what we can do now on our auth.js, we include the user schema model, which we access it by the name user model. Now using the express router, which is by the name auth router, we initialize here. Using this we will make a request, which simply means that from the Flutter application on the sign up page, the user fill up the sign up form and the user click on the sign up button, then it will be post. So we do not need this, you can remove it, and we can simply say auth router dot post, and our API URL, or you can say the endpoint you can access for the sign up, it will be /API/auth/sign up. So this will be, as I told you, for the sign up, and then for example later on for the sign in we will have API/auth/sign in. Okay, so anyways, let's proceed step by step. Request comma response. Then inside the try catch block, you can say try catch. With catch comes exception, so we can say exp, or you can simply say error. Okay, so console.error, and then display the error which occurred, and then we can say response dot status 500.json. Can say error dot message. So in case of any error, the catch block will execute and we show the error in the console using the console.error, and then using the response we can say response.status 500, which means the error message we pass using the key error, which is accessible by this error. Okay, so we have error.message. This is in case of the exception, that is if there is any problem. Other than this, if everything goes successful, which simply means that from our client Flutter application, from the sign up page, the user fill out the sign up form and click on the create account button. Then using this URL, this API URL, we will pass that sign up information, which simply means username, user email, and user password, which means that we have to request that information. So we can simply say request.body. That is that information which we request, or you can say which we will receive. Okay, so we will assign, or you can say the username is accessible by this username now, and user email is accessible by this name, and user password is accessible by this name. Okay, the value of the username is accessible by these. Now in any application, you know that when we sign up, when we create a new account for a user, then first we check if that email already exists in the database. So in MongoDB, we will do the same using nodejs express server. We can do like wait user model dot find one and find the user email. So it will find the user email in the user collection, or you can say using the user schema. Okay, so if it exists, if the email exists, then it will have a true value. If the email exists, then this is email exist will have a true value, otherwise it will have a false value. So we can check now that if it is true, if is email exist, if this become equals to true, then in that case we will have the response, which will be response.status 400, and make sure to return this. Okay, because we have to display the result in the client Flutter application, that is in our Flutter application on the sign up page. The user will see also the response, that is the result. For example, in case of error, the user will see, to the user we will display the error message, which we will access by this error key. And in case if the email, for example, if the try block execute and the email already exists, then in that case we return response.status 400, and then we will return this message, and which will be accessible by this key name message, and we will have our own message. So in case if the email do not exist, it means it's a new email and we will create an account. So in that case, the else part will execute. So now we can simply using our user model, let's give it name as user info, new user model, and the information is we will pass the user email, okay, which we receive here from the client Flutter application from the sign up info, okay, the sign up information. So user email value is inside this variable, username value is inside this variable, okay, and user password value is inside this variable. So we can say username and then of course user password. And as we have now the user info, then we will save it in the database. So we can say wait user info dot save, and we assign the result to the same user info variable, and then after it we will say response dot json user info. So after this piece of code, when it execute and this piece of code execute, it will save the user information like username, user email, user password to the MongoDB under the users man collection. Now if you notice here, we are passing the password directly. We want to make it secured, or you can say we want to make it hashed. So to make the password secure, open up the new terminal, and we are going to install a package, a new one, which will be npm I, and it is called bcrypt, 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 bcrypt.js. Okay, press enter, npm I bcrypt.js, and it is installed successfully. If you check the package.json, then you will see, okay, it is installed successfully. So go to the auth.js, and now we have to include here require bcrypt.js, and we can access it by this bcrypt.js hashing. So now, and then in the else part, before saving the user information to the database, we can say wait bcrypt.js hashing, make sure to add semicolon dot hash. Inside the parenthesis, we want to hash the user password comma 9, which simply means hash the password with 9 random characters. So like this, it create a secured hash password with random 9 character string, and then the result of this we assign to our this secured hash password. So let's assign this secure hash password to the user password. So we can say user password colon secured hash password. So now we are ready to test our API by sending the post request. So make sure to click on file and save all, and we need to add an extension. So here you can search for Thunder, this one, Thunder client, lightweight REST API client for VS Code. It is similar like Postman. Okay, so search for this one and simply install. And after when it is installed successfully, you will see here this icon, okay, Thunder client. You can click on it and it will open Thunder client, okay, as you can see here. Then in here you will see this button which says new request. Click on this new request. Now since we will post, so make sure to select from here post and then our API URL. So you have to write local host colon, after the colon you have to write your port number, which you can get from the index.json as we define here. Okay, so this port number, so you can say localhost colon port number, and then for which purpose we are sending the request. For that we have defined our URL, that is /API/auth/signup. Okay, so copy this and we can paste it after the port number. We have /API/auth/signup. Then click on body, and here we have to define our data for the testing purpose. For example, first we have the username, and you have to use the same key names which you have defined in the user schema model.js file. For example, for the username we have this username key. Okay, so we will use the same one. So inside the double quotes we can say username colon, and let's say the value of this is Muhammad Ali, comma, then the next one we have is, for example, the user email, and both are required. Okay, so we must pass these. Okay, the required fields we have to pass. So user email, and the value of this is, let's say ALIZEB. I will write my email, alizeb@75@gmail.com, comma, and you know that we have one more required field, which is the password, user password. So we can say user password inside the double quotes colon, and let's say I will give password, let's say 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. So now if you click on the send button, so you see that it says connection was refused by the server because your server is stopped. So make sure that you start running your server. So let's start the server node index.js. So our server is now running successfully on port 4000. You can see that, and we are connected to MongoDB successfully. Now let's send the request again. I will minimize this, okay, a little. So let's send the request, and here you can see we get another error which says cannot destructure property username of request body as it is undefined. Now also let's go to the code. If you remember, we have used here this one. So now when we post the request, when we send the request, the catch block execute, okay, and we get the error. Okay, so for the internal server error we get the code 500, okay, as a response. So that's why here we say that response.status 500. For the server related errors, this will execute, for example, and we get the error message by the key name error. In front of it we will have the message, error message. As you can see, error, and in front of it you see the error message. Later on in the client app, in the Flutter application, we will access this error message by this key name error. So anyways, now let's fix this error. Now here we have to understand something. As you see that here we are testing the API, okay, that is post, which means send the information. This information we are passing, which simply means that imagine this is our client app, okay, our Flutter application, that is from the sign up page. The user fill out the username, okay, username, user email, user password, okay, the name, email and password. And by the key name, username, user email, user password, we are passing its values, okay, from the client app. When the user click on the create account button, that is something which we will perform. We will send the request, that is we will post using this API URL. So imagine this is our client Flutter application, that is this. When the user click on create account button, it means like send. So this information is sent using these keys. So when it is sent after clicking the send button, or you can say after clicking the create account button from the client app, then it is received, that is that information is received here by the same key names like username, user email, user password. Okay, by these key names we are passing it, we are sending it, and we are receiving it here, okay, request.body. Now one thing you should know that this information we pass as JSON, as a JavaScript object, which is the key value pair. So we have to handle this JSON data, okay, which is coming from the client as JSON object, okay, which is coming from the client as JSON object, and which we receive here. So for that purpose, on the index.js, inside the index.js, here we can say application.use, and we will say express.json. So the JSON data will be sent using the HTTP post request, okay. So now make sure to save all. If the terminal is running, make sure to close the terminal first and then open up the new terminal and start the server. So the server is running now, and now let's come back here and now let's send request. And here we go. The data which we send as a post request using our API URL, okay, which we send, it is received here, okay, using these key names it is received, and then we check if this email already exists which we sent, okay, this one. So it do not exist, you know that it is a new database and this is the first user which we just create. So as it returns false, the email do not exist already, so it return false, so the else statement execute. So what we did here, first we make our password secure using the bcrypt hashing, so the password is secured. So after that, what we did, we basically get together the user data, for example email, username and user password in secure form, in hashed form, and that we save, that data we save to the MongoDB, to our database, and we assign that to user info, to the same user info, and we said response.js user info, which means if the data saved successfully, then it shows the result in JSON, which you see here as a response. Okay, you can see the response. We get this JSON data as a response, that is, this is created. You can see that the password is converted to secure password. It is hash password. You can see that. And also we have to go to the MongoDB, make sure that your database, which is your project backend Amazon clone, is selected. Okay, and then click on database, and then click on browse collection. And here you can see that the users collection is created just like according to our schema. For example, if you go to the user schema, then you see that we create users collection under which we have the user schema, for example, under which we have the user name, user email, user password, user address, which is empty, and user type, which is user by default. So this was our schema, or you can say our data structure. Okay, this was our data structure for the users collection. So what we did, using the same data structure on our nodejs, for example, when we send a request, for example, from the client application, from here, when the user fill out the sign up form, click on create account button. When this request is sent, that is the user information from the sign up page, it is sent. And that information from the client sign up we receive here. Okay, that JSON data of the user, as you know, it is sent as a JSON object. So that data is received here, which is accessible by the same key names by which we have passed it. By these same key names we have passed, that is, we have sent from here, and using the same key names we receive it here. So it is accessible by these: username, user email, user password. So using our schema, as you know that this user model simply represents our user schema model. Okay, so by that format, by that data structure, that is, we pass to it the user email, username, and user password in secure hash form. Using that, we save the user info to the MongoDB, and that's why in the database you see this information, just like the user schema we defined, just like the data structure we defined on our user schema model.js file, which you can see here: username, user email, user password, user address, and the user type. And each user, when it is created, automatically by default you can say a unique ID is assigned to each user. It is like a primary key. Using this unique ID, we can recognize each user. So for example, we will have multiple users, and every user will have its own unique ID, using which we can recognize each user. Now let's test the other feature, which is if the email already exists. And in that case, it must execute this if statement. Now here we commit one small mistake, which is in Node.js you cannot say double equals to true. Okay, instead you can do it like this: if is email exist, which means if it is true, then it will execute this. Also, one more mistake which I notice here on our user schema model.js file. Make sure that you write here email result. Okay, I have wrote this earlier, email result.test. Okay, the result from this. Okay, email result.test. And also we commit here one more mistake. This validator will be inside validate, validate, validate colon, and put curly braces, and then inside this validate you will add this validator. You will add this validator, just like this. Okay, so now what we can do is we will save all and make sure to stop the server, as we did the changes, so we have to run the server again. So now let's go to Thunder client and make a new request. So it returns this error message. Let's say, for example, even if there is, let's say, another user, John Parker, let's say, and the password is, let's say, this one. Okay, and imagine this is the client app. The user John Parker fill out sign up form, click on create account. That is post, send request. okay, with the email using which we have already an account existed. So now when the request is sent, then it will return us status 400 bad stat, and the message this one, email already exists, please try another one, and you know that it is this one. It will check if this email already exists, it returns true. So if it is true, then it returns us this message with the value message. And in the client app, on the user interface, in order to display this error message to the user, we will access this message by this key name. So anyways, this was this feature if the email already exists. Next thing is to check this feature, the email validation. So for that purpose, we have to pass badly formatted email. Let's say, for example, the user email is John Parker, and let's say @ not exist, johnparker@gmail.com, and the user fill out the sign up form, click on create account, the request is sent, okay, it returns the error, user validation failed, user email validator failed for path, user email with this email. So it is internal server error, which means it is this error, okay, internal server error. So it returns the exception with the key name error, which you can see here with the key name error, and this error it sends us as a response from the server, okay, which we display. So for example, in the client app, here we will display the error message to the user. Using this key error, we can access that error message. We can access this error message using this key name error. And then if the email is correct, let's say johnparker@gmail.com, and the user fill out then the sign up form correctly, click on create account, the request is sent, that is post, and account created, status 200 OK. So now you also understand the status code 400, status code 500, and the success status code 200, which is OK, 200 OK status. So the new user is created. If you go to the MongoDB, refresh the database, and here we go. Here you can see John Parker having its own unique ID, username, user email, user password, user address, user type, you can see. Now just like the sign up, now let's implement the backend logic for the sign in API. So we can say auth router dot post, let me maximize it, the access, that is the API URL /API/auth/sign-in, asynchronous request comma response Now, just like for the sign up, as you know that we are using the try catch block. In the same way, we will use try catch, and what we can do is you can copy the catch block from here for catching error, okay, and paste it here just like this. It will be the same. If there is any error from the server side, it will catch that error and display, okay. So make sure to do it like this. And then in the try block from our client application, when the user fill up the sign in form by providing email and password, and the user click on the login button, then this email and password information we will receive here, just like we did here for the sign up. In case of sign in, we will receive that, okay, and you know that in case of sign in we have only user email and user password. So when the user click on login, that is the request is sent, and it contains the user email information and the user password information. So email and password we receive, okay, and we can access it by user email and user password here. Then For the login, the basic logic is, you know, that whenever we sign in, we first check if that email even exists in the database. So the same logic applies, that is just like we did for the sign up, in the same way we can do for the sign in. That is, we first check for that email, if email exists. So now in case of login, what we will do, we will check if not is email exist. If the email not exist, then in that case we will return a message that is this email do not exist. Okay, so in the same way, with the same status code for 100, we can say that is this email is not associated with any user. We will say please try correct email. Okay, so if the email not exist, simply return this error message. Okay, other than this, if it exists, that is the else part. If it exists, then simply log in the user. So now for the login part, you have to remember something, that is, while saving the password, we make the password secured. Okay, we add hashing to it. We hash the password using bcrypt.js. So in the same way, the password which we get from the client, that is which the user type here, that password we have to compare now with the password from the MongoDB. And you know that in the MongoDB it is in hash form. So for that purpose, remember that if this email exists, it means this will get the user record as well. For example, let's say this user try to log in. Okay, so on the client tab, the user type the email and password. So first we check that email if it exists in the database, in the collection, in the user's collection. For any user, if that email exists. So for example, for this user, this specific email exists. Okay, so it means is email exists. By doing so, we have now access also to the user record, which includes the user ID, username, user email, user password, address, and user type, which means this email alongside with this information, this whole object, this whole information, or you can say that whole object is accessible by this email exist. That is, using this we can access it. So for example, I will simply assign it to a new variable, that is it contains the user info. Okay, we can say user info, or you can say user information. So to this we will assign the is email exist. So for example, the email exists, which means we have the access now to the user information. And the best thing to add this is here, that is, if the user information found, then that information user information we assign to the user info. And then we say wet bcrypt hashing, and just like as I told you at the start, we will compare the password which the user type on the client app, that is here. That password we will compare with the password coming from the database for that user for whom the email exists in the database. Okay, so for example, the password from the client, which is user password, and then we compare it with the data from the database. So you can either, let's call it a proper name like user data from, as our database is MongoDB, so we can say MongoDB. Okay, so user data from MongoDB for that email which exists. Okay, so it also bring the whole user data. So using this we can say user data from MongoDB dot user password. As you know, in the database it is by the key name user password. Okay, so in the same way we can say user data from MongoDB dot user password. So what we do, the password from the client, which is coming from the client, that password we compare to the password from the database, and it will give us the result, that is, if both password are equals to each other, if the both password are equal to each other, it means the password is correct. So the result we have to assign to a variable. We will give it name as password correct. Okay, so if both password are equals to each other, then the result will be assigned to password correct. Now of course we have to check, we don't know either it is correct or not, so the result is inside this password correct variable. So we can say if not password correct, which means if password is not correct, then in that case we will return the message, and that message will be password is incorrect, please try again, or any message you want to display here, okay, related to the password. For example, you can say please try with correct password. It is totally up to you. Else, the else part simply means the password is correct and we have to sign in the user. For that purpose, we will install a new package, npm space I space JSON web token. Press enter. Install JSON web token. So it has been installed successfully, as you can see here in the package.json. Now here we will include it here. Const, let's give it name as JSON web token. Require JSON web token. Now the user who basically logged in now, as the else part execute, it means he will logged in successfully. So basically we are creating for that user, this will generate a unique token for that user. So what we can do here, we can simply say JSON.sign, and here we will say ID, and to this we will assign the ID coming from the database. So you know that we can say user data from MongoDB, and the ID in the database is by the key name underscore ID, as you can see, okay, underscore ID. So the ID from the database we assign to ID, and then make sure to do this inside the curly braces, okay. So first we add curly brace and then we say ID colon, to ID we assign the ID coming from the database for that logged in user, and then after the curly brace comma, inside the double quotes we can say secret pass. Now using this secret pass we will authenticate the user. So this is the token. Let's assign it to the variable token. We can say JSON web token, okay, because it is generated by the JSON web token. So as the user is logged in successfully, now the next thing after the token is to return also the information for the logged in user. So we can say response.json token. We are returning this token JWT, and also the user information from the database. So write 3 times dots, then our user info from DB. So you can say user info from DB dot underscore doc. Now what this document means, if you have worked with the NoSQL database, then you know that documents are basically which is inside the collection. For example, we have the user's main collection, and currently we have 2 documents. This is first document, this is second document, which means first user and then second user, or you can say first user information and second user information. So first document and second document. For example, after successful sign in, as you know that the user who logged in successfully, that user information only we display, okay, alongside with the token. Now let's save all and we are going to start the server and test our application. So the server start running, as you can see, connected to MongoDB, and let's open up the Thunder client, new request, and we are going to make a request now. Make sure to write the same API URL which you defined here, for example for the sign in. Okay, as you can see, and you know that, for example, this is the client app. So for the client app, the user provide email, password, and click on the login button. So you will say user email, user password after clicking the login button, which means, for example, we will send request after clicking the login button, and here you can see the response come, status 200 OK, and you see we have the token JWT, which is exactly which we display as a response. Okay, so token JWT and the user document, that is the user information for the user who logged in, johnparker@gmail.com. You can even compare it with the database. For example, this was the user who logged in successfully by providing correct email and password. Now, for example, if there are any user who do not exist in the database, whose record is not even there, and that user try to log in, for example, instead of John Parker, let's say there is person whose name is Peter. Okay, send request. This email is not associated with any user, try correct email. Status 400 bad request, which simply means that it executes this part, okay, which returns this message. This email is not associated with any user, try correct email. Now the other important thing which we have to check is basically if the email is correct and the password is wrong. Okay, let's say I write the wrong password. Okay, on the client app, user write email and password, and the password is, let's say, incorrect. Okay, I write incorrect password, and then the user click on login button, which means we will send request. Here you can see password is incorrect, please try again, which means that the email found in the database, and it basically get the user document. For example, as the email belongs to John Parker, so it get this document and it is assigned to this. But when we compare, that is the password from the client is not match, it does not match with the password from the user document, or you can say the password from the database for that specific user, John Parker. It do not match. Password from the client do not match with the password from the database. So in that case, if it do not match, then it execute this, that is if password not correct. That's why we add this exclamation. If password not correct, then in that case we say password is incorrect, please try again. Now one more thing you can do here is, for example, if the password and email is correct, you know that it brings us a response, that is it contains the token and the user document from the database, which means the user data from the database. Now there will be scenarios you may want to exclude some information from the user document. Okay, so for example, let's say if there is sensitive information like user password, or let's say user MasterCard number, or let's say user bank account details, for example, there will be some sensitive information which you may not want to send a response, that is you may want it to remove it from the document. So for that purpose, if you want to remove specific information from the user document, let's say we want to remove user password. So for that purpose, as you know that it contains the data from the database, okay, and we want to exclude, or you can say to remove sensitive information like user password from it. So what we will do, we will simply say that is from the user document, we want to exclude the information, like we will define that here inside the curly brace. For example, we want to exclude from it the user password. So you have to write that key name. For example, user password we want to exclude, and we want to exclude it from the user document, which simply means the data which is coming from the database, that is called the document. For example, this specific document, as John Parker is trying to log in, so from the John Parker document, remove the password. So we say user password, comma, and that removed information we can say 3 times dots, and we will assign it to, that is the information without password. So we can say user data, let's give it name as without sensitive info, without sensitive information. So this user data without sensitive info, it contains the user document without the user password. Let's say you want to remove further information, like let's say for example, let's say the user email is also sensitive, or let's say the username is sensitive, for example. Okay, I'm just giving you example. For example, in the current scenario only password is sensitive, but just let's say the username is also sensitive. So you include that sensitive information here, that is you want to remove user password and username from the user document, that is the data which is coming from the database for that specific user who is trying to log in. For example, from John Parker document we want to remove user password and username, and after removing this, the result will be inside this user data without sensitive info. So we will, for example, display this. Instead of this, we will just directly say 3 times dots and then user data without sensitive information. Now make sure to close the server, save all, and then start the server again, and let's test. So now let's, for example, the user write the email password which you see here, okay, and then clicking on the login button we will send the request, and you know that the information like email password, it will be that information, we get the user email, user password from it, and the rest of the logic you already know that. First we check if that email exists. If the email exists, alongside with this, if the email exists, you know the else part will execute, and alongside with the email exists, you know that if the email exists, it simply means it will get that user document. So once it get that user document, or you can say that user information, that we assign to user data from MongoDB variable. Then what we do, we compare the user password from client, for example, which we receive here, okay, from client, that password we compare with the password coming from the database. So if both match, then we log in the user. So for example, let's check the current logic in which we hide, or you can say in which we remove the sensitive information, like for example user password and username from the data from the user document, or you can say from the user data coming from the database. So now let's send request, and here you can see that from the user document the user password and the username is removed. The user password and username, now you see it is removed, because for example we thought that this is our sensitive information and we do not want to send this as a response. So we basically remove the user password and username from the user document, okay. User data without sensitive information we send back. You can see that it do not contain now user password and username. So this was just an example which I wanted to share with you guys. This was an important concept which you must know about it. So for now I will simply go back to the previous code, and only what I will do, that is from the user document only the user password is the sensitive information. So for now we will just remove the user password from the user document, okay, and we will display the user data without sensitive info, for example, which exclude the user password. So I will simply stop the server, make sure to save all, new terminal, and server is running now. And now let's come here and let's send request. As you can see, user password is excluded, okay. Now let's say the other user elizabeth75@gmail.com, and his password was this. So if we send request, this email is not associated with any user. Try correct email because it was this. Okay, elizabeth75@gmail.com. So let's send request, and here you can see that.